This is joint work with Philipp Herkenhof, who works at my chair at the University of Munich. We live in an era of hyper-globalization. When you look at this figure, which measures the degree of openness of economies, the ratio of manufacturing trade to production since 1900, we see three waves of liberalization. One wave was between 1950 and 80s. This was the liberalization of trade in industrialized countries. The next wave was between 1980 and 2009, which was the liberalization in developing countries. And since 1990, we have hyperglobalization, which was basically introduced by revolutionary changes in transport, containerization, and the falling communication costs, which led to the emergence of global value chains. But since 2011, trade is stagnating. Trade openness is stagnating. Trade is not growing as fast, faster than GDP, world GDP, as we can see since 2011. And the question is why? And there have been basically three explanations for the trade slowdown. One was that we are observing a slowdown in the growth of global value chains, which is called reshoring, slow investment growth, and lastly, inward-looking China. In my talk, I will only focus on the first candidate explanation, namely reshoring, that global value chains have stopped to grow. And here, we see World Bank trade data which document indeed that global value chains have stopped to grow since 2011. It's basically in the figure, you can see it by the dark blue line and the black line. These are GVC, this is global value chains. And so what you see is basically in the financial crisis, global value chains dropped, and then they recovered after the financial crisis. But since 2011, there is no further growth in global value chains. So the question I would like to ask is, why have global value chains stopped to grow? So I would like to discuss with you this hypothesis. The hypothesis is that we are facing a revival of manufacturing in rich countries. Robots will bring manufacturing back to rich countries as machines are replacing workers and the cost of labor does not matter much anymore. So if the cost of labor does not matter much because production becomes very capital intensive, you can as well relocate production to the rich countries. So how important are robots in industrialized countries? Here, in this figure, I show you basically that robotization in industrialized countries, and what you see is basically that the process of robotization already started in the mid-90s. So it's not a new phenomenon. We talk about it today, but it is an ongoing process. And what also these figures show is that Japan, Korea, and Germany are the most robot-intensive countries. They have about 4 to 6 robots per 1,000 employees. It's interesting that Japan has been retreating from the degree of robotization. And it's also interesting in this graph that the France and the US, what you can see in here downstairs, they are laggard countries in the degree of robotization because they employ about 1 to 1.5 robots per 1,000 employees. So let me turn now to global value chains. Here I'm showing you countries, rich countries, which have chosen Eastern Europe as their most important destination for global value chains. Here you can see Germany, Austria, and in particular the Scandinavian countries. For those countries, Eastern Europe is the most important destination for global value chains. What you also see here is that in some of these rich countries, China has overtaken Eastern Europe as an important destination for global value chains, namely in the United Kingdom, as you can see here, in the Netherlands, in France somewhat, and in Spain somewhat. Here I'm showing you countries for which China is the most important destination for global chains, in which you see that the US is such a country, but all these Asian countries and Russia use China as the most important destination for their global value chains. So the question I want to ask is, how come industrialized countries have continued to offshore production to these low-wage countries in spite of the fact that these countries have been experiencing a rapid rise in their wages? So why was that? And the answer to this lies in this figure. So what you see here in particular in this figure is you see the amount of robotization in some of the Eastern European countries like Slovenia, which is this yellow one, Slovakia, which is the red one, and the Czech Republic. You see that in these countries, robotization increased in particularly fast. It's also true for China, but it's at a very low level. So what that suggests is that Slovenia, Czech Republic, and Slovakia have now more robots per 1,000 employees than France, the US, Spain, and Austria. So in this way, these Eastern European countries have been able to be attractive as a location for global value chains in spite of rising wages, and that has allowed these countries to escape what is called the middle income trap. That middle income countries have been growing fast, but at some point their wages rises so much that they stop to grow because they lose their comparative advantage of being a low-wage country. So the Eastern European countries that I just showed you have been successful in escaping the middle income trap by investing in robotization. So let me now turn to the relationship between robots and global value chains, which is my hypothesis one. The question is, have robots contributed to the decline in the global value chains to reshoring? And here I'm looking at this relationship. On the horizontal axis, you have robots per value added in $1,000. On the vertical axis, you have a measure of offshoring, which is the imported inputs from low-wage countries in total inputs in a sector, in manufacturing. That's my measure of offshoring. So the idea here is, if a sector is organized in global value chains, it will be importing its input from these low-wage countries to its home country. And that so an increase in the amount of imported inputs is a sign that offshoring increases. So what you basically see before the financial crisis, you see no relationship between the two. After the financial crisis, since 2010, you see a clear negative relationship between the amount of robots in a country and the amount of offshoring the country engages in. So let me summarize what I'm finding here. What I'm finding here is that after the financial crisis, reshoring emerges. A decline of global value chains emerges in response to to the amount of robots countries have been introducing. So let me show you this here. So this is after the financial crisis. So what we find is that the more robots a country has, the less it engages in offshoring. So a 1 percentage point increase in robot intensity leads to a decline in the growth rate of offshoring of about 0.8 percentage points. So clearly, and this was not the case before the financial crisis. So before the financial crisis, basically robotization and offshoring were complements. They took place at the same time. After the financial crisis, they became substitutes. So robots have allowed these countries to reshore activities from the low-wage countries to the rich countries. What we also see, and this is shown by the red bulk, what we also see is that in the destination countries, in the low-wage countries, the European Union continue to invest, to relocate global value chains to these destination countries when these destination countries invested in robotization. Look at this. I mean, in these developing countries, wages increase because they become richer, the wages increase, they get foreign direct investment, both of them contribute to increases in wages. They potentially lose their comparative advantage. So in order to prevent that from happening, they invested in robots to keep on to be attractive, low-cost location for these global value chains. And this is what we find. We find that in these destination countries, an increase in the amount or in the intensity of robotization by 1 percentage point increases the growth rate of offshoring to these countries by roughly also 1 percentage point. This is now for the European Union as a high-wage country. So high-wage European Union countries keep on investing in low-wage countries, keep on relocating their production chains to these countries when these countries invest in robotization, keeping their cost advantage in spite of rising wages. So what we have just found, much more time do I have? Excuse me?
12 minutes.
Okay. What we find here is that reshoring is real. We have been so the global value chains, we see stagnating global value chains because robots have helped. Because robots have helped. Because robots have helped these, the rich countries to keep costs low and relocate activity to their home base. So how good is this for labor markets? Is this good news for labor markets? Now, rich countries get back the manufacturing sector that they lost to the developing countries. Is this now good news for the labor markets in developing countries? That's the question I want to address now. And that brings me to my second hypothesis. The second hypothesis says that intelligent machines will replace smart people rather than increase the demand for skills. So what I want to put forward to you here is that the technology, digitalization, is a capital bias technology rather than a skill bias technology. So here are some examples to make that a convincing argument. There are intelligent robots, intelligent software called narrative science, EMMA. They produce reports on numbers in something like 3 minutes. Reports that I can never write. So these are not sophisticated reports. These are reports that give a summary of the data, basically. But this is what mostly journalists do and some financial analysts do, you know? And therefore, they potentially replace these type of occupations. Then we have a legal software that searches for precedences in law. So like it used to be the case that the lawyer was engaged in searching for precedences in law. He or she earned a decent income. She had a university degree, earned a decent income. And this, basically, this activity is now potentially replacing this type of occupation because this software, a pattern recognition software, can show you this in a couple of minutes. Then we have a medical software that diagnoses diseases, which potentially replaces medical doctors. And we have online courses, Udacity and Morg, which potentially replaces university professors like me. So let me come to the idea, what is a skill-biased technology? This is how the academic literature so far has looked at digitalization. It's a skill-biased technology. So the idea here is the more you employ this technology, the more academic people you need, the more skills you need. So technology and skills are complements. And the prediction by this skill-biased technical change is that you should observe a rise in the skill premium. So what's the skill premium? The skill premium is the relative wage between somebody who has a university degree and someone who has a high school degree. So we can look at data for this. Here we have data for several rich countries, okay? So basically, the skill-biased technology view of technology is, it can be seen in the US. So what you see in the US is, I give you here hourly wages by skill levels. So the blue line gives you the wages, the hourly wages of somebody who has a university degree. The red line, the wages for somebody who has a high school degree, and the green line for somebody who has primary education. And so what the skill-biased technology hypothesis predicts is that you see this spread. And the US is an example of this. But now look at the European countries, and you don't see it. Basically, so look at France. The blue line is below, okay? Austria, Italy, Spain, okay? Maybe Germany in recent years becomes more like a skill-biased technology. And here I'm explicitly showing you the skill premium, which is, okay, so take the yellow line. The yellow line tells you is the relative wage between somebody who has a university degree and someone who has a high school degree. And what you see basically is for the US, somehow it flattened out since the early 2000s, but basically it's increasing. But in the other countries, we don't see an increase, but a decline, except maybe for Germany. So summing up, except for Germany, we only see a decline in the skill premium in Europe. So a more nuanced hypothesis to the skill-biased technology is the polarization hypothesis. And this hypothesis says that information technology replaces routine jobs in the middle of the income distribution. It threatens the middle class, while wages in the top jobs, complex top jobs like managers, and complex low bottom jobs like nurses, they will have an increase in their relative wage. That's the polarization hypothesis. And what you basically see, I'm showing you the same graph, that cannot be true because the polarization hypothesis says that the relative wage of the middle income should decline, but we don't see it. Take again the yellow line, you see the relative wage of the high skilled is declining relative to the high school degree. So the question is, why is the skill premium declining? So there are two possibilities. One is that the demand for people with academic degrees is declining. This is my hypothesis too, which says that the technology is capital biased rather than skill biased. And the other possibility is that the supply of people with academic degrees has increased too much. We had a too rapid expansion of higher education. So let me look at both sides. So here is the demand side, capital bias technology. So in the capital bias technology, production becomes more capital intensive. Technology and skills are substitutes. Academic people are replaced by machines. The demand for people with academic degrees declines. So intelligent robots replaces lawyers, doctors, professors, journalists, financial analysts, and so on. Do we have evidence for this? Yes? Do we have evidence for this? First of all, one piece of evidence is that we have a constant skill premium in the US since the early 2000s. The second is the global decline in the labor share in GDP. And in an important paper, Karabarbunis and Naiman, which has been published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics in 2014, they show that basically the global decline in the labor share, 50% of this decline can be attributed to lower prices for technology. And thirdly, we have a rising skill unemployment. So I won't have time to walk you through all of this evidence. Here is the global decline in the labor share. This is the red line, the red curve, and you look at it on the right scale, and here is an average for all OECD countries, and basically it declined from something like 65% to something like 56%. This is a global phenomenon, and therefore it has to be explained by something global. So the technology has been a contributing factor to an increase in inequality between capital and labor. This is what that paper suggests. And here we have an increase in the unemployment rate by skilled workers, in particular among the young. I don't walk you through the data, but this is basically what shows up. So let me come to the supply side. So the supply side is saying that the expansion of higher education in Europe has been faster than the speed of technical change. The expansion of higher education gives you the supply of academic people, and the speed of technical change gives you how much demand there is for these skilled people. So if higher education is expanding faster than the speed of technical change, you should expect a decline in the skill premium, because the supply increases stronger than the demand. So actually there is an important book by Goldin and Katz. It's called The Race Between Education and Technology. And in this book, they show that the skill premium in the US has been rising in the 80s and 90s because education stopped to advance while technology kept advancing. So what I'm suggesting is that the reverse is happening in Europe. The skill premium in Europe is declining because the supply of academic people is expanding faster than the demand for these people driven by technology. So what's the evidence? Here I give you the supply of educated people. This is the roughly tertiary education by OECD. This is roughly people with an academic degree, a university degree, in percent of the population. And what you see here is that the blue line is Austria. So it's between 1995 and 2000. 12, this share has increased by 250%. In France, it increased by something like 60%. In Italy, it increased by 200%. In the UK, it also increased by 200%. And in Spain, it increased something like 80%. The only two countries in which the expansion of higher education wasn't that fast is Germany and the United States. In this last 15 years, in these two countries, the expansion of higher education was 25%. So this is it. The share of poverty, so we have a rapid increase in the share of expansion of higher education. So are we fighting the wrong battle? You know, I mean, the response to globalization and the emergence of China is that the rich countries should invest in education, education, education. So what these numbers suggest, that Europe has been pushing this too far, because actually the expansion of higher education was exceeding that what the demand for skills was due to the technical change. So the policy implication is, maybe the scarcity of education and talent is lying behind us, and the push for more and higher education is maybe the wrong way to go. Thank you.